Morning people wake up for peace and quiet. McDonald's breakfast people, we wake up for the sweet rush of getting that warm, delicious breakfast right before it ends.
Crush your morning goals with a steak, egg, and cheese bagel or any breakfast sandwich and snag another one for just $1 with the buy one, get one deal. Only in the McDonald's app. Limited time only at participating McDonald's. Valid once per day. Must opt into rewards.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
I think a lot of times what people believe is if we have grace or compassion for those who are going through divorce, then it means that we're devaluing marriage. And it's just not true. So both things can coexist. So I can both celebrate it, value it, believe that, it does take work, and to also know that there are times when people are in an irreparable situation, even if it's at the current moment, right? There are some people who years later then reconcile if they have, done some work and transformed. So we're not saying that, things are impossible, but there are times when it is not God, it is not loving to leave people in a toxic space and demand that if they love Jesus, that is their cross.
You hold me to your chest, drape like a memory. We both wish we'd forget.
Welcome to the Deconstructionist Podcast. I'm your host, John Williamson, and it is now April, although at the time of this recording, as I'm recording this intro, it is the end of March, and life has gotten very strange for me and for everyone else. We are, I don't know what you would call it, I guess self-imposed quarantine. The state of Ohio, where we record, has actually gone into kind of a mandated shutdown, so no non-essential travel. Most of the businesses around us have closed down, so it's a scary time. There's a lot of people that we are friends with and family members who are dependent upon having businesses that are open and having clients that can show up and that sort of thing. So feel very lucky. Adam and I have been texting back and forth and having virtual happy hours together. And we're very lucky. Our day jobs allow us essentially to work from home. So we've been doing that for the last couple of weeks or month by the time this comes out. And it's kind of scary not knowing when we'll be back in the office or when, things will get back to some level of normalcy. But I think it's good, that we're taking the steps to try to slow the spread and hopefully get it to the point where it's manageable and we can kind of resume life as it was before. So we'll see. So stay safe out there, everybody. Wash your hands, practice good social distancing, lather up in hand sanitizer and all the other things that are recommended. So anyway, this month we had recorded a couple episodes a while ago, actually. I've been working on putting together a series, although it started out as one episode and ended up as 2 episodes. So the month of April, we will be diving deep into the topic of divorce. So if there are some of you out there who have either experienced divorce firsthand, whether that means that your parents went through a divorce or you yourself went through a divorce, it's a very tricky thing to go through. It can be very painful. It can be in some instances the lowest point of your life. And so add in to that the fact that a lot of Christian denominations or strains of Christianity tend to not be, we'll say, helpful. And there's some shame that can potentially come along with it. It just makes a pretty terrible experience even that much worse. And so I brought on a special guest. So I really loved my conversation with this guest, and I have to give credit where credit is due. Natasha, who's been helping me out with the podcast, my de facto personal assistant put this person in front of me, and could not be more grateful. Now get back and send those emails. Just kidding. But this guest was really great. She's not only a therapist, but she's also an ordained minister as well within the Methodist Church. So she's a licensed psychologist, ordained minister, and sacred artist. She's worked nationally and globally to provide relief and empowerment to marginalized persons. She's a professor at Pepperdine University, and she's got a lot of other accolades. I'll put obviously the links in the show notes. She's also got an amazing podcast called the Homecoming Podcast, where she does singular episodes on different topics. And so what's interesting is I just popped on here. I subscribe. She has an episode number 38. I'm sure she'll have well into the 40s by the time this comes out. But episode 38 she did on coping with anxiety and uncertainty and dealing with the coronavirus outbreak. So she's just got some really great topics on here, embracing the authentic self, dealing with depression, and of course, one of my favorite episodes she's done on the topic of divorce. So really great episode. Really enjoyed it. And what else? Yes. So the episode after that actually turned into kind of a unique thing that I've never done before with the podcast. It's actually got two guests on it, and two guests who are good friends of mine who agreed to come on and be very vulnerable and open and talk about their personal firsthand experiences with it. And so my friend Chelsea and my friend Ryan both came on to give the female and male perspective. And so we'll talk more about that later, but that will be out in 2 weeks after this episode is kind of a complimentary episode to go along with this episode. But Dr. Thema Bryant-Davis is our guest this week. She's incredible, just does amazing work, has a lot of really good tips and best practices when dealing with divorce, specifically in this episode. So we get into it. It's a personal episode for me. It's something that I've not talked about publicly on the podcast. We've just kind of alluded to the fact that last year was a rough year. And so for me personally, I did go through a divorce personally, and it was not an easy time. It's not something I ever set out to go through, as I'm sure any of you listening who have been through one. No one ever says, you know what, I'm going to get married and someday I'm going to get divorced. That's not the goal. So, this last year's been a year of personal self-reflection and just a year of self-reflection and trying to figure out, how we can do better next time if I'm so lucky to get a second shot at it. So, and how to best take care of my daughter. So this episode is a little personal for me, and I always view my own personal experiences as opportunities to hopefully or potentially maybe help somebody else. And so if you guys benefit from this episode, then fantastic. And that's what I hope it serves as, is something that is helpful. So I hope you guys enjoy this one. Like I said, I really enjoyed the guest. And as usual, if you like what we're doing and you want to support us, it could be anything from leaving us a 5-star review on iTunes, which helps us gain exposure, helps other people find us, following us on social media. You can if you go to our website, www.thedeconstructionists.com, you'll find all of our previous episodes. You'll find links to our social media. You'll find our blog that's way, way overdue for new material and new content. We're working on it. You can find our web store. So if you want a t-shirt or a mug or a sweet pint glass from which to drink your ale, we have those on there. We also have links to our Patreon campaign as well. So we have some cool stuff on there if you want to support us on a monthly basis. Obviously, we know a lot of you are probably in dire financial straits right now. So if you can, great. If you can't, just say hi. That's fine too. So anyway, without further ado, before we get to it, the musical guest is Ed Prosek this week, and he was kind enough to let us use his music for this episode. if you like his music, follow him on social media, go out and find his music, and as always, support the artist if you can, and follow our Spotify playlist. We have a Spotify playlist for the podcast where we update it along with the guests that we use that week. So thank you guys so much. And hopefully you enjoy this episode. And again, in 2 weeks, we'll have another episode as a complimentary piece to this one. So hopefully you guys are digging it. And then we'll be back in May with new topics. So thank you guys so much. Without further ado, here is Dr. Reverend Thema Bryant-Davis.
There's no lower I could go from here.
Well, welcome to the Deconstructionist Podcast. I am so excited to have today's guest on. We've gotten a lot of requests for certain topics that just require someone well beyond our expertise. And so we have Dr. Thema Bryant-Davis on today, who is a therapist. And I'll let you talk a little more about your background. But thank you so much for being here with us today.
Oh, thank you so much. I am excited that you offer this platform and glad to be a part of it as we think about integrating our spiritual health and our mental health and relationships. So I'm grateful. Thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. So tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you got into your work that you do today.
Yes. So growing up, I grew up predominantly in Baltimore, Maryland, the daughter of a pastor. And that really was my first exposure to what's traditionally called pastoral counseling. And being African American, especially, people didn't really talk about going to therapy. If anything, they would talk about going to talk to their pastor. And so growing up in the parsonage as the pastor's daughter, it was a common occurrence that people would call the house in distress. And even if my parents weren't there or available, people would just start talking or just be overwhelmed. And while I have a brother who's 2 years older, we got into a pattern where he would hand me the phone. If he answered and people were upset, he would hand me the phone. And I just have a heart and for hearing people, being willing to bear witness and, walk with people through those valleys. And so I had that interest early and then learned more about psychology and doing it, outside of church. And so I had an interest in majoring in psychology and really wanting to help people be well and whole. And I do feel like it is a calling, a vocation, that there's a large piece that you learn studying in school, but there is also, I would say, like a gifting or calling for it spiritually. And I also eventually accepted my call into ministry, which took a while because growing up, I would often hear my parents speak negatively about people who were only pastors on Sunday. And, they kind of had the thought of if you say yes to God, you need to give God everything. And especially within the African-American tradition, a quote-unquote real church is not just open on Sunday, right? It's open 7 days a week, and there's ministries and services and, all kinds of things happening that makes it like vital to the community. And so because I really felt called into psychology, then the ministry part didn't seem like it was an authentic calling for me because I wasn't going to walk away from psychology. And then as I got older, I got exposed to more people who were what we call bivocational, and that wasn't like a terrible thing, that you could do ministry work and also have giftings and interest in other areas. So getting that exposure, I did accept my call into ministry. And so I am an ordained elder in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. And I'm not a lead pastor, but I usually do ministry with women, mental health ministries, and I love the sacred arts. So I direct the dance ministry, the teen dance ministry at our church. And so I'm involved in that way. I ended up getting my Master's of Divinity, and so really looking at being a bridge between communities of faith and mental health. And so that's my passion. And so your platform is perfect for looking at those intersections.
Yeah, you are uniquely qualified in that way.
Thank you.
The mental health thing, we have always been huge advocates of mental health and, taking care of yourself in that way, just as you would any other physical thing.
Yes.
And so, but that's been there's a tricky history, I think, in the church when it comes to mental health. So what was that like for you, kind of balancing both?
Absolutely. It was helping people to get out of what we call the false dichotomy or the false choice of, people say like, you don't need therapy, you need to pray. And it's like, those are not like options on either extreme of like, if you're going to pray, you don't go to counseling. So I talk to people about, you can pray on your way to therapy, depending on the therapist, you could pray at therapy, you can pray when you leave. So it's not that doing one thing is counter to the other. So most people in the faith also, see medical doctors or call plumbers. So it's not like, are you going to pray or are you going to call the plumber? Are you going to trust God to stop the water from leaking, or are you going to call? And it's like, no, you don't have to choose, and that God can answer both directly, and also God can work through people. And so I think it also pushes up against what I call the prosperity gospel that gets connected to mental health, where just like some people will argue, if you love God, then you're going to be wealthy, which ignores all the people of faith who live in poverty. But also people will say that related to mental health, that, if you love God, you'll never be depressed. If you love God, you'll never have anxiety. And it's just not biblical, and it's not true, that faith can coexist with our despair. And so speaking the truth about that is important.
Oh, that's so true. One of the topics that we've gotten requests a lot about and just haven't addressed really on the podcast yet, and it turns out my personal life kind of forced me to to really think deeply about this topic, is the topic of divorce. Within Christianity, I myself have never spoken about it publicly on the podcast, but about a year ago, I went through a divorce myself, and as you can imagine, a very difficult time. But then on top of that, there is, at least within some circles of Christianity, a stigma associated with that, where that's not an option necessarily. So what do you say to people who are really struggling with that, but really probably should get out of an unhealthy marriage?
Yeah. And first, I want to appreciate your courage and risk-taking to speak the truth, because I think because of the shame and stigma, we often are all walking around with these silent testimonies, right, of things that God brought us through, but we could never tell anybody because of what they will think about that, right? So I appreciate you naming it as not just like an abstract, interesting topic, but a part of your journey. And one of the things that the church has operated in that has been harmful is to say we are willing to save the marriage even if it kills the people. And that has really been a lot of churches and pastors' approach and mindset, that they will have people who come to pastoral counseling that are dying spiritually, emotionally, and for some people physically. And the response has been to ignore that and say, well, the success is going to be in, counting the number of years, So even in my church, they have, people stand and celebrate how many years is their anniversary. And so we're counting numbers, but ignoring health, ignoring wellness, and sending out a message that God doesn't care about that, or that it's selfish to be concerned about your emotional and spiritual well-being. And there is also within relationships, one of the pieces of work that I do is looking at how the church can better respond to intimate partner violence or domestic violence. And traditionally, we have been very silent and instead have really put the weight of responsibility on people who have been victimized, whether emotionally, physically, or sexually, financial abuse, spiritual abuse. And we say, you should just pray more and submit. But we do not have a church culture of accountability for harm being done, and not really an understanding of process. I think a part of what happens is we want to just have hope and faith that things will be okay without any accountability process or treatment. And it is unfair to both people. And it also, even when people will put pressure on couples and say, you're supposed to stay together for the children. And you talk to, I do therapy with children who have grown up in very toxic households, and they're saying, I wish we would have left.
Yeah.
Right. So if you think you're doing me a favor by staying in this, but this is terrible.
Right.
So I think it requires a new understanding of what God's intention was. We talk about that God is love, that it is meant to be loving. Right. And, I've heard ministers say stuff like, your happiness isn't important. That's just selfish. It's not about being happy. It's about doing what God said. So it's like,
Oof.
If God is love, right, and everybody living there is miserable on various levels, to ignore that is not only problematic, but we can do harm. And then it's also not teaching. One of the things I do is premarital counseling. And many things, we are not just equipped or prepared for. So I think for us to hold up something as a value and a priority, and then not really empower, teach, support people for that to happen, it's a setup, right? So yes, you love each other, and that's wonderful, but we also usually grew up very differently, have very different assumptions and shoulds, expectations, and many times those things have never been discussed. People who are about to get married and haven't had a real conversation about how they think about money, about their relationship with their in-laws. You have one who said oh, I thought we would hang out at my parents' house every weekend, and the other one was like, oh, I'm what is that? I'm leaving and cleaving, right? Yeah. So I'm done with that. Sometimes it's to the level of things being abusive, and other times it really is about people are not aligned, right? That, we can, there are cases when people are coming in and it's not so much that someone is so wrong, but it just doesn't align with each other, right? They're not on the same page about these major issues. And so, of course, the easiest thing is to say a verse and send them home. But that's not doing pastoral care. That's not doing care. It's really neglectful. and blaming and shaming. I was doing a women's Bible in South Los Angeles, and I had a woman who come, and she said, it just really broke my heart. She said, "I'm divorced. Can I be here?"
Oh,
And I said, "Right?" I'm like, "Wait, what?" So she goes, "Well, I just know like at some churches you can't be there if you're divorced." I'm like, no. You are welcome. You're welcomed here. So it's like, how have we misinterpreted the gospel where that is the take home message? And so, it requires, I think, a lot of times what people believe is if we have grace or compassion for those who are going through divorce, then it means that we're devaluing marriage. And it's just not true. So both things can coexist. So I can both celebrate it, value it, believe that, it does take work, and to also know that there are times when people are in an irreparable situation, even if it's at the current moment, right? There are some people who years later then reconcile if they have, done some work and transformed. So we're not saying that, things are impossible, but there are times when it is not God, it is not loving to leave people in a toxic space and demand that if they love Jesus, that is their cross. So when God talks about our cross to bear, like it's not each other.
Yeah.
It's one thing for us to, work together because we're dealing with like an external force. But when someone is being someone's cross, right, intentionally, then we have to really take another look at what we say is their responsibility. And I know for many people, it's a hard deciding point because, yes, marriage is work. And then at the same time, there can be a place where it is not working and it is not healthy and it is not God. And the other thing sometimes we don't want to examine is sometimes this wasn't God's choice for us.
Ooh,
right?
Yeah.
Sometimes we chose and then prayed that God would bless it. Right? So we're like, well, this person's pretty cool. And like, here I am. So Lord, bless it. And so, there are just so many pathways that could end up in resulting in a person or a couple being in that place. And when we are so condemning and self-righteous, we turn people away from God. And, the Bible says that nothing can separate us from the love of God through Christ Jesus. So does God love me if I'm divorced? Absolutely. Can God still use me? Does God still choose me? Absolutely. And so it is our hang-ups that then put people beyond the reach or love of God.
Sometimes I get lost in your memory as I wander these old dirty streets. I keep looking over my shoulder, thinking you were still holding on to my head.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. So talk a little bit about, I want to mention your podcast as well, because it's absolutely amazing. The Homecoming podcast is so good. And
thank you.
You have such a gift for covering like pretty dense topics within 45 minutes to an hour. And so I loved you did a podcast, an episode on divorce, and you've done a number of topics, including rejection, which I think, goes hand in hand in a lot of instances with divorce. And you give some very concrete things that to do and to look at and to think about, when you're going through a divorce. And so what's the first step when someone's going through a breakup like that? I look at it almost like another sort of mourning. We did some episodes on mourning recently, and it just my brain immediately went back to that because it is kind of a death of a relationship.
Yes, absolutely. And so, giving ourselves permission to feel our feelings. And sometimes that can be another churchy thing where you can't have feelings, right?
Yeah.
When my brother went to seminary, he was talking about how he learned quickly the culture is whenever you say, if someone says, "How are you?" you're supposed to reply, "I'm blessed," right?
Yeah.
I'm blessed, I'm blessed, I'm blessed. And it's like, no, I'm blessed and depressed, right? I'm blessed and angry. I'm blessed and frustrated and disappointed. So to heal, we have to first acknowledge the wound. And so to talk about and give ourselves permission to, without shame, to feel what we feel. And there can be a range of emotions. So a part of it, as you mentioned, is the grieving of either what was, because sometimes in the beginning, it was good, or sometimes it never was, and we're grieving what we had hoped for, like the image or dream of what this was going to be. I was talking to one man recently going through a divorce, and he was saying he was grieving the idea that he was going to grow old with someone, and so he just thought that's what it was going to be, and so now at this stage in his life, being alone again, right? So there are different pieces that we can grieve. We can be grieving that person's presence in our life in that way, and the relationship in the aftermath varies. Like some people shift into friendship, and some people never speak to each other, can never see each other again. So we have to take all of that into account, because sometimes we start comparing ourselves to other people, but their situation can be totally different. So grief is one. Another one is the sadness, which for some can turn into depression. So really being aware of that. For some people, they're angry. They're angry if maybe if it wasn't their choice and the other person was the decider, or they're angry about what the other person did that they felt, was kind of a last straw. And so, can I love Jesus and be angry sometimes? Yeah. Yeah, you can. Sometimes we're mad. We can be disappointed, and then eventually, people can also feel the loneliness, because depending on how long you were together, whether you were getting along or not, there was just a presence, right? You walk in the house and there's a presence there. And so then to go from that to either no one being there or just being there with the kids, there can, really be a loneliness. Another one is like a loss of a circle, because some people were a couple that were friends with other couples. And so then once they're not a couple anymore, sometimes the couples won't invite you because they don't want the single person there, or they may have, quote unquote, have sided with the partner. So there can be multiple losses related to that. And so allowing yourself, giving yourself permission to feel what you feel. And what goes along with that is also having friends or family that where you don't have to perform. Some people, they ask how you're doing, but like they can't handle the truth, or like they don't really want to know the truth.
Right.
So, you give like the surface answer of, I'm all right, it's a transition, but it's okay. But needing to have some people in your life where you can be real on like, oh, today was rough, or like last night I couldn't sleep, or, whatever it is, being able to have those who will bear witness.
That's so big. We talk about a lot. Yeah. We've done this podcast for about 4 years, been very blessed to be able to do so. And one of the things that we've constantly preached since the very start was just this need for community, just in general.
Yeah.
Yes. And how important that is with people that you can be authentic with without fear, be open and honest with show your true colors and not, and not feel ashamed of that. So I love that.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I love that you talked about, you just mentioned this and you talk about it in the podcast about divorce, is because I felt this, and I remember when I was listening to the episode, I thought, oh gosh, yeah, it felt good to know that I wasn't the only one. So when I went through my own personal divorce, I was 39 and found myself quickly turning 40, and then suddenly things were not as I had envisioned and planned. I don't think anyone gets married with the goal to get divorced, and
right.
And so now, I find myself as a 40-year-old single person again with a young daughter, and my friend groups are all in very different places. Most of them are still married, and so it can be very isolating.
Yeah.
So that seems to be common. Talk about that a little bit, though, because I think that's a danger, right?
Yes, absolutely. That, we say like the loss of community, and, people are, something. I think what ends up happening for a lot of people when they don't know what to say, they don't show up at all. Right. So they feel like it's awkward. And that goes into like our false teaching or false belief that there is a quote unquote right thing to say. Right. Like if I can find just the right verse, I'm going to say it to him and it'll cheer him right up and he'll feel better. Right. So one of the things that I learned in our chaplaincy course, it was called Ministry During Times of Crisis, is the gift of sacred presence. That it's not about having the quote unquote right thing to say, but just showing up for people. And a lot of times people are uncomfortable with that or feel awkward about it. And so there can be this real isolation and feeling like there are not a lot of people who get you, and that's just out of the circle that you were in, right? Although there are growing numbers of people who have gone through divorce or who are now parenting alone or co-parenting. But if that was not a part of your prior circle, then it can really feel like, not only what is this, but like, who am I? Because the last time you had that single identity was however young you were when you got married. And so, and also usually then that, you did not have children. And so now it's like, who is this person? And we have to be so careful as you talk about that time being dangerous, because sometimes we can look for things to distract us or look for things to numb the pain. And so that can turn into food. It can turn into substances. It can turn into constantly scrolling on social media because, that desire for connection and also wanting to disconnect from the wound or from the pain. And so it's a challenging time, as you say, to build community, but it's so important, whether it is thinking about individual counseling. Also, some places have divorce recovery support groups, which can be really helpful because then you're in community with people who are going through the journey, going through the process. And so knowing within ourselves, I think first needing to remove that stigma and that shame. I think even the languaging around quote unquote failed marriage, right?
Yeah.
It's like, what a term, especially for people who may have been successful in life, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, you were good at that, but this is a failure. And I wonder about when we think about our spiritual and emotional health, that sometimes it is a success to walk away.
Yeah. And I think, for my ex and I, one of the things that we had talked about, and we came away from it with the goal to be an example of two people who can get along and who can co-parent successfully. And
beautiful.
Yeah. And it's not always been easy. There are times where we get frustrated with one another,
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. And it is, and that's another thing, that we don't give workshops on, right? It's co-parenting.
Yeah.
How do we navigate this and, working through the communication and trying to really honor the child. I remember at my daughter's preschool, now she's in high school, but when she was in preschool, one day I was dropping her off and the teachers were talking about how they were trying to figure out which parent had dropped off this little boy, because depending on who dropped him off that day determines whether he can eat meat.
Oh.
And I was like, what in the world? Come on, we can vegan on Tuesday, Thursday.
That's right.
But it can be like these things that are, like deal breakers. So really just trying to honor ourselves, honor God, honor the kids in the process. And as you say, it's going to be imperfect. It's a messy business, but when it is a priority for both people to do that, then you can continue to communicate about it and try to find the rhythm of it in ways that work well. And what a great example for kids to see, since people are so concerned about the children. Yes, how can they see people who, even if they decided that they weren't going to be together, that they were in agreement of their love for me and their want for me to have a good life, right? So that's an important lesson for them to get to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. I want to go back to something you said earlier, just about because I recall this from your episode on divorce, talking about the importance of the role of positive friendships. And you used this term that I loved, that I think a lot of people who may have gone through a divorce or even gone through a breakup of some kind could probably relate to. And it's this term you use called cognitive distortion. Talk about that a little. What is that?
Yeah, so we can come to believe some things that are not true, and it is how we make sense of traumatic or really bad experiences. And so sometimes that can be an overgeneralization, right? So this person that you were married to did this one particular thing, and then we can overgeneralize and say, this is what people do, right? Or this is what all women do or what all men do. But we can also have distortions about ourselves, how we think about ourselves and how we think about relationships. And so sometimes we are defining ourselves by our wounds or by the lies that we have been told directly or indirectly, often even predating marriage. And so, growing up, challenging things happen, and we try to study them to make sense of the world, and the conclusion that we come to can be off base, but we are living with it as our script. And so being in the presence of people who won't co-sign the lie or the distortion, but also people who we can hear it from. We have to be careful about only being able to be friends with people who agree with everything we say and do. But instead, if I can have enough trust, love, and friendship, that if someone points out something to me, that I can hear it and not without getting defensive. But even if that requires me now needing to adjust how I consider ththings. I was talking with a gentleman recently who had gone through a divorce, and the script, he just was holding on to was that, because I asked him, because he works a lot, I asked him, was the job a part of what led to the demise of the marriage? And he says, well, that's what she said. She said that I worked too much, but I didn't hear her complaining when it was time to spend the money. Right. So he is dismissing the statement because you were paying bills and because you were able to get a nice house and a nice car. And so, that was like the locked in script. And so I just said to him, oh, it sounds like she was lonely.
Yeah.
Right? That's it. That's all. That's it. That's what, yeah. Yeah. So that's what it was. Your wife was lonely. And, it was this moment of shifting. And that's a part of when we talk about the recovery process too, is in the beginning, usually, some people are different, but usually in the beginning, it's easier to see other people's stuff, right? What other people, how they were a part of the demise or the ending. But with growth and maturity and with grace and self-compassion, we can also start to see ourselves, and see, what was my role in all of this, even if it goes back to my selecting or picking to begin with, or the things I did not speak about that were actually important to me, but I just silently hoped it wouldn't be an issue, right? So it may not even be overt, large behaviors, but the ways in which we navigate that can create pits in a relationship.
I'm on my way back down. Won't you stop me? 'Cause I know now that I was wrong. I'm on my way back down. Oh, it's too late to save me now, 'cause I was wrong.
Yeah, and you talk about that in that episode too, as I recall. Learning from your prior relationship,
Yes.
and learning how to be better about identifying potential red flags and things in future relationships.
Absolutely. We can take that wisdom with us. So, one of the things we no one wants to do is like repeat cycles and dysfunctional patterns, right? Because else you'll switch people, but it's the same issues, right? Because sometimes what we're calling our type is actually an issue.
Yeah.
So maybe you need a new type, right?
Yeah.
So looking at what did I learn about relationships? What did I learn about myself? And also sometimes, depending on how many years you were in it, sometimes you have a different list or qualities of what you're looking for. When you were younger, you may not even have known some attributes were important. So it wasn't even like on your list of things that you were looking for in a partner. But in the aftermath, then you may have a different sense of what's important and what works well for me, and important conversations to have up front instead of, just hoping in silence that we'll agree, right? So people can bring more wisdom, maturity, insight, but, that's having done the work. So I do talk about not doing the rebound thing, which can be hard, especially when people are lonely, but really taking time to heal and get insight and clarity. And then, of course, what people often talk about is how the dating world has changed.
Oh, my gosh.
So, right?
Yeah.
Like they're like, what in the world? What is this?
So bad. Yeah.
And clients come in talking about the different apps, and they have to clarify for me, like, which app is which and what does that mean? So
it is an absolute nightmare. Yeah.
So, and that can be, a source of despair, because it can also be not like one, not having pictured being divorced, period. But then even if you pictured it, not thinking maybe that it would be this hard or challenging or different to just find people you have something in common with, right? Or common values or interest. So that's a part of the journey too.
Yeah, talk about the role of taking time after your divorce for self-discovery, because you had this really great thing to say on your episode about getting reacquainted with yourself, and where. But I think you mentioned this a little bit a few minutes ago about your priorities may be different. You may be a different person.
Yes, absolutely. That sometimes we can think being busy is being healed. So we can trick ourselves, right? That if I'm doing a lot, I must be okay. But sometimes we're doing a lot because we're not okay. That, the silence is deafening. So to avoid the pain, I'm going to, call all these people, or, go on all these dates, or sometimes we throw ourselves into volunteerism at the church. Like the best volunteer, doesn't want to go home is the truth, right? They don't want to go home. So they sign up for everything.
Yep.
And so coming to the place of, am I busy or am I well? And that's not, the same thing. And then also not wanting to create more confusion, because when I'm in a really wounded place, it affects how I choose and what I choose, because I am maybe feeling so needy or vulnerable, or, so hungry to get back into something that's very deep. Right. So it's like you're on the first date and already imagining, like, so could they be a good step parent to my child? Right. It's
Yeah.
like, just trying to like drink the Starbucks, but then like, so trying to just be present in the moment so that we can see it clearly, instead of just seeing it through the lens of like our hopes and wants and needs, but really hearing like what people are telling us, seeing what people are showing us, so that it's not connecting with a fantasy, with our idea of who someone is, or them connecting with the self we are presenting, which could be different than our authentic self. One of the other things I talk about, I think in a different episode, is sometimes if people are drawn to you when you're in your broken state, when you start to heal, then they're not as attracted. Like what they found attractive was being your rescuer. And so, right, they liked it, right? If they like you like that, you're not so sure. Are they going to like you when you have opinions, right? They're going to like you when you get your confidence back. So it's like, that's not fully you. And unfortunately, I've seen that sometimes happen with couples. Sometimes you have people who like really do want the best for you and want you to be well and are pulling for you. And for some people, they like the power dynamic of carrying you. And so when you start walking, it can disrupt the dynamics.
Gosh. Yeah. So well, I would love for you to talk, since we're on this topic of growth and evolving as a person. I've heard so many people say that the reason, the root cause of the demise of their marriage is because they just grew apart. And yet I think to myself, I'm like, yeah, as a human being, you constantly evolve and grow, and you shouldn't be the same person now that you were 10 years ago. I'm a much different version of myself now than I was back then. And I think in many ways, a much better version of myself. So I guess my question is, within the context of a marriage, when you're looking at somebody who's divorced, or even somebody who's never been married, but looking to marry or remarry in certain instances, how do you grow together and both evolve as people without growing apart per se?
Yeah. So it is a couple of things. One, I would say, is seeing, and if you're not dating them at the time, talking about how people respond to struggle and stress and failure. Because often our growth comes out of difficult times, and the way we manage during difficulty, like what our go-tos are, often become issues in the relationship, right? So some people, their go-to in the midst of stress is they need the admiration of strangers, right? So it gets into the flirtation, right? That for some people, when they're struggling, they remove themselves from their faith. Like, well, you hear people say, like, God and I aren't on speaking terms, right?
Yeah.
So if that's your go-to, it's like when things fall apart, then I disconnect from that. That's important to be aware of, because for some people that will be their quote unquote growth, right? Is they'll say, well, I grew and realized I didn't need to go to a traditional church, or I didn't need to pray, that my growth is within me. Well, now if you're with someone who has a counter value, right, that for them, when I am the most distressed is when I lean on my faith the most, well, then you can just look down the road and know there's going to be some challenges there, right? So what is it that we, and it's not that our things have to be identical, it's just when they are counter to each other, right? And when, having conversations about how much or what are the areas in which we have to agree, because some couples have said things like, if the person doesn't agree with them, they think they're not listening. And that's just not, like, people can listen and still disagree, right?
Right.
But there are some people who are like, no, you don't hear me. You must not be hearing me. And it's like, they heard you, right? And they want me to repeat what they said. I'm like, they heard you. They just don't agree with you. And so some people go into relationships with this assumption that, like, we have to be clones. So what are the areas where I'm cool with us having differences or different interpretations, different ideas? And what are the areas that, like, I need the person who is my companion to be in agreement on, right? And we have to, like, interrogate that for ourselves of, what are the things we're like, oh, it would be nice if we share this in common, but it's not, it's not that deep. And then there are things that are that deep, where, like, if you can't meet me here, if we're not eye to eye on this is gonna end up being an issue. And often, what we have in relationships are some people pleasing, where we are silent about the things that are important to us, and we're just hoping eventually the person will see it our way, or when life shows up, disappointment shows up, death of a parent shows up, that it can shift us in ways in terms of what are our go-tos, or what are we looking for to nourish us, that can end up splitting people apart.
One of the episodes that I really liked that you did, I think I mentioned at the top of the podcast, was this episode on the idea of rejection, which I think is so closely tied for a lot of people when it comes to divorce. And I love I wrote this quote down. This is my notepad. You said,
"Oh, good."
You said, "Rejection is an event, not an identity." Talk about that.
Absolutely. And this goes back to the distorted cognitions, or we also in cognitive therapy call it a core belief, right? So what is it that you have come to believe about yourself? And whatever we believe about ourselves shapes the way we feel, and it shapes the way we act. And those things together, our thoughts, our feelings, our behaviors, those are our lives. So we are shaping our lives around these core beliefs. So some of us are walking around with the identity, I am the rejected one, right? And so from a narrative perspective, if I were to tell my story, I center my story around all the times I have been rejected and abandoned and not chosen, and I make that into the equivalent of me. So then if I am walking around with that as who I am, then I will show up in spaces with my insecurities, with my fear, with my expectation of the worst. And then some of that can become a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Because I'm bringing it into the space. So it's not telling us to ignore the times we have been rejected, but to know, here's the challenging thing. We are not always treated the way we deserve. But because we often believe that if I have been mistreated, then that must be all I am worthy of. That must be what I deserve, that I don't deserve a good life. I don't deserve good treatment. I don't deserve love. And so then I will settle, right? Because I'm just lucky, quote unquote, that they picked me. Right? Or I don't want to let people get too close, because if they get to know me, then they will see there is not much to me, and then they will reject me. And so then I'm emotionally unavailable, or I'm masking and guarded and defensive. And so we release the idea that what has been done to us is our identity. We recognize that those things happen. But even if I have not been treated well, I am worthy of being loved and respected and cared for. That it's an act of faith, really, to believe it if you've never experienced it. And that's what's required for the wellness.
Oh, that's good.
Thank you.
The last thing I want to ask you before we let you go is for those who are listening right now who have either gone through a divorce or going through a divorce, or even, like I said, just a bad breakup. Because a lot of times, you can be in a relationship for a long, long period of time, and it essentially feels like a marriage. There's history there. There's, your lives are so deeply integrated. And I think a lot of people I've talked to have gone through that. Oftentimes, feel as if they're in some way defective, and especially when they're trying to begin the dating process again. And as I said before, I don't think too many people get married with the idea that one day they're going to get divorced.
Right.
But I think for me personally, I certainly never intended on doing that, but I would absolutely love to get married again and get it right this time. So what do you say to people who are in that space where they're like, man, I failed once. Like, is this just going to happen again? Like, should I take the risk kind of thing?
Yeah. So I think, first of all, that it's beautiful to get to that place of wanting it again, because when you're in the grief and the pain, it's just, you can be really in a shutdown mode, and the isolation and not wanting any parts of that. And so it can be an indication of growth and healing to desire companionship again and to desire marriage again. And I think it is about, that balancing act of bringing in the wisdom from the past, but not the baggage of the past.
Right.
Right. So it's like, I want to learn the lessons. Like, let me, often you can be a better partner because you have lived and learned and seen the effects of different dynamics, and also know the importance of communication and not just letting things build up, and really being tuned in, right? So to know that you come in with that the wisdom of experience, as opposed to it just being like tainted or negative, and then at the same time being mindful that the person you're with, unless you reconciled, is not the person you were with before, right? So not assuming that this person that like, oh, well, when my ex was silent, it meant this, this, this. So now I'm going to like lay that on this other person, which may not be the case at all. So it is being willing to see people with fresh eyes, and not making them carry the baggage of the past disappointments while you still have learned the lessons of the past. So it is definitely possible and beautiful. And as we started with, God is love. So it's it's a wonderful thing to be able to not only find it, but then cultivate it, maintain it over time.
God, you're so good at this.
Thank you. Well, you ask great questions.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Well, I really appreciate you coming on. Like I said, I'm such a huge fan of your work, and I think people need to hear it. So like I said before, go out, listen to the Homecoming podcast. But where else can people find your work right now?
Yeah, so the podcast is on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, and YouTube. And my website is Dr. Thema, DrThema.com. And if you look up my name on Amazon, it's Thema Bryant-Davis. You'll see a number of books. Some I have authored, some I'm the co-editor, and some I have chapters in other people's books. But the least expensive option is I have an ebook called Tweets for the Soul, and you can order that on Amazon, and then you'll get the quotes and be able to apply them to your life.
Oh, that's brilliant. I love it. We'll have all that stuff in the show notes for sure too, so we can send people that way. Great. But thank you so much for your time. This is absolutely fantastic. Like I said, it was kind of a personal thing too, for me to have you on, kind of selfish reasons. So,
but I'm glad because, like you said, you're not the only one.
Yeah.
And so then your experience, allows you to ask the questions that people really want to know. So that's beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you so much. Keep doing the great work you're doing. I really think you're helping a lot of people out there. So, and thank you again for coming on the show tonight. So really appreciate it.
Thank you. Blessings to you. Take care.
From the beginning, we had to burn all of this to see what we were missing. And it always felt like something had to come and save us from ourselves. And we were always hoping this would just fix itself, but it never will. Maybe this was hopeless. Maybe it was hopeless. You should be killing me, killing me, killing me, killing me, killing me. And I ain't losing sleep, wondering how this shit could have been. Maybe in another life everything could have turned out alright in the end. But I ain't wasting time sitting here wondering how this shit could have been. Oh, how it could have been. But I can't help the feeling it was hopeless. Maybe we were blameless, but I feel just like a sinner, begging for forgiveness with the blood still on my fingernails. I don't love you, I can't even love myself. And all that's left is emptiness. Maybe it was hopeless. Should be killing me, killing me, killing me, killing me, killing me. But I ain't losing sleep, wondering how this shit could have been. Maybe in another life everything could have turned out alright in the end. But I ain't wasting time sitting here wondering how this shit could have been. Oh, how it could have been. But I can't help the feeling it was hopeless. Should be killing